sucedido, murió el sherife mayor, quedando Roman herido. Otro día por la mañana, cuando la gente llegó, unos a los otros dicen, no saben quién lo mató.
The life of Americo Paredes spanned over 8 decades and included events that changed the world forever. He was born September 3, 1915, during the devastation of World War I and the chaos of the Mexican Revolution. He remembered,
I was born in Brownsville. I'm a Brownsville boy. On September 3rd, 1915, during the height of the so-called border troubles, the sediciosos, when there was a kind of ethnic cleansing, to use a current word, along the border, when rangers and others murdered a number of Mexicans and intimidated a lot of others to leave the country.
Americo Paredes grew up between two worlds along the U.S.-Mexican border, one written about in books, the other sung about in ballads and narrative and folk tales. Until the age of 14, he and his younger brother, Amador, would spend their summers on their Uncle Vicente's ranch near Matamoros. The rest of the family went to San Antonio or South Padre Island. Paredes reminisced.
We would head immediately across the river, the back way. Everybody had little boats hidden along the reeds there, and we would stay there for 3 months, living like Mexicans, listening to the old people tell their stories. My father would come down sometimes also, and then at the end of August they'd drag us back to Brownsville. Once there, I was living in another world.
The decades of the 1930s left a lasting impression upon Americo Paredes. He said that although he did live well in school initially, the Great Depression virtually broke his family. Paredes recalled that his family had no money. Although he survived, many other Mexicans dropped out of school during those years. It was near the end of his junior year that the young Paredes entered a poetry contest in 1933 sponsored by Trinity College, located then in Waxahachie, Texas. When Paredes saw the announcement posted on the bulletin board, he completed the application and submitted a poem entitled A Sonnet to Night.
It was this junior English teacher that got it, I suppose. She just put it on the bulletin board. It wasn't announced anywhere. I saw it, and on my own, I wasn't going to ask the lady anything. I went and got the address and sent a poem on my own. It was a sonnet to night, a very forgettable poem, really, but it won first prize.
His education combined both classroom learning and family learning. He continually took an interest in the folklore and music of the South Texas border. The fact that his mother sang ballads and told stories at their home further enhanced the interest that had begun around the rancho campfires in Matamoros. Americo was a young man who not only enjoyed hearing stories, he enjoyed telling stories. His nephew Manfred del Castillo recalls.
Americo loved to tell stories. He loved to tell stories, and one night we were all sitting in this 2-story building where we used to sleep, and it was next to our garage. And Americo was telling us a story about La Llorona or Monje Loco. I don't recall which one, but it was a real spooky story. And he would get up and walk around and explain how the creatures looked with their teeth, you know, and their fiery eyes. And he had a way of putting things that he kept you in awe, you know, in suspense, you know. And all of a sudden he walked over and he flipped off the light switch. And boy, pandemonium broke loose. Everybody started screaming, hollering, yelling, and running, and we jumped out of the 2nd-story building. Some of them climbed up in the garage, and others ran down the stairway. But he was that type of person. He liked to pull pranks on people.
The love of storytelling would remain with Americo throughout his life. Paredes had aspirations of attending college, but he could not afford it until a very opportune meeting occurred with J.W. Red Irving, who served as high school principal and dean of the junior college. Paredes remembered.
Well, school ends. I get my high school diploma. That was it. Nowhere to go. So I was standing on a street corner in Brownsville. I think it was Levy instead of Elizabeth, with a few other kids. Not looking for trouble, they were just standing around waiting for it to come around, I guess. When the dean and principal drove by in his little Chevy, it was a roadster with a rumble seat, I don't know whether you've ever seen those, and he saw me and he stopped and backed. This was already late June, I think. And he called me, I went up and said, "Are you going to junior college?" And I said, "No, I'm not. I don't have the money for it." "Did you apply for a student assistantship?" And I told him, "What's that?"
Paredes graduated from Brownsville Junior College in 1936. To make a living, Americo drove a delivery truck for Paredes and Sons before working for the Brownsville Herald. That same year, the 21-year-old Paredes completed his first poetry book, Black Roses, and published his first poetry book, Cantos de Adolescencia. One poem, El Rio Bravo, describes the river, its paths and currents, and his journey to join the river when it reaches its end. The poem is indeed prophetic, because after his death, Paredes would indeed be reunited with the river. Despite the economic impact of the Depression, Paredes managed to work several jobs, including the Brownsville Herald. As a musical performer at radio station KWWG, he met and later married a young singer named Chelo Silva. In 1940, he began working for Pan American Airways during the War Preparedness Program. During these years, Paredes also worked on his first novel, George Washington Gomez.
I wrote that novel with George Washington Gomez. I finished it about the end of 1939 when the war started. It was supposed to be volume 1 of a longer novel.
Despite his exemption from the military, he made a conscious decision to join the Army. It would be a decision that would forever change his life.
I could not volunteer because at that time, this was in 44 already, they didn't want people in the Navy, they didn't want people in the Air Force. They wanted people with rifles. They weren't called grunts at that time, but that was what they wanted. So they told me, go home, we'll call you. And I worked for the Herald full-time for a little, and they took me.
Paredes wrote and edited articles for the GI Opener, a military newspaper publication, and served as political editor for the Tokyo-based Pacific Stars and Stripes, the Armed Forces daily newspaper. In 1946, he was discharged, but remained in the Far East for 4 more years working in public relations for the international branch of the American Red Cross. Americo's absence in Chelo's career led to the divorce in September 6, 1947. Their only child, Americo Jr., was just 4 years old. It was in Japan that Paredes met the woman who would be his love and partner for the rest of his life. They wed on May 28, 1948, and remained married for over 50 years. In 1950, Americo and Amelia decided to return to the States, where Americo hoped to pursue his dream of completing a doctorate in English. In 1956, Paredes completed his doctorate degree in English, folklore, and Spanish.
So I started teaching in 1951. And of course I worked like hell. Let my wife run the house and everything while I worked to get 2 degrees in, 51 in 5 years.
In doing so, Paredes became one of the first Mexican Americans to receive a PhD in English from the University of Texas at Austin. He had completed a lifelong goal and had opened the doors for many others to follow. His thesis was both groundbreaking and controversial. His topic was about Gregorio Cortés, a Mexican-American folk hero who lived at the turn of the 20th century. Paredes first heard the ballad sung by his mother and by the old men on the ranchos along the river. The men vilified Cortés, who managed a heroic escape from the Texas Rangers. Paredes made a decision to find the truth about the controversial character. He commented,
I was very much aware, I certainly was not the only one, that what we were taught in school at the time and what we knew in our hearts and what our elders told us was different, that our heritage was not being given the respect that it deserved.
He would do this for the next 4 decades. He taught for a year and prepared his groundbreaking dissertation for publication. As the Chicano movement unfolded in California, Chicanos there discovered Paredes' book and began to embrace it.
The book appeared in '58 until the Chicanos in California discovered it. Some Chicanos in California told me that the book was very important to the movimiento. From there on, the book sold in California, and finally, people in Texas began to hear about it. So that is my connection with the movimiento. Apparently, we helped each other. I helped them by giving him a book that they could use to speak, to write, and to use as a model. They helped me by making me known.
In the fall of 1958, Paredes returned to the University of Texas at Austin, where he became an assistant professor of English until 1961, when he was promoted to associate professor. In 1965, he became full professor of English, and 1 year later, he became full professor of anthropology as well. The publication of his dissertation and his groundbreaking research soon gained him a regional and national reputation as one of the leading experts on the corrido. By this time, Americo and Amelia had 3 children, Alan, Vincent, and Julia. Amelia had been described by her son Vincent as an enabler because she cared for the Paredes' children the time that Americo was away as a visiting professor, presenting his research at conferences throughout North America and Europe. Although away periodically because of his academic responsibilities, Paredes loved his wife and his children very much. Vincent recalls what life was like in Paredes' household.
I remember sitting down and having to sit down for breakfast as a family, and then having to sit down together as a family and for dinner, that kind of thing, especially on weekends, Sundays. And, you know, that was an important thing to him until, of course, we became teenagers and we were never around to sit down. So now that I look back, those were things that I think are special now, that I remember about our family.
Throughout his life, Americo Paredes received numerous awards. He responded to the accolades with the usual dignity that he responded to everything else.
He never talked about the importance of an award. There were times, again, with that Order of the Aztec, I think that to him was something that I could tell that it was a big deal. But I think he saw it more as an opportunity for him to be heard, where, you know, before his voice and voices like him hadn't been heard.
The decades of the 1970s was indeed memorable for Americo Paredes. He emerged as one of the most prolific and most respected folklorists and scholars in the United States. In this year, Paredes helped to found CIMAS on the University of Texas campus.
The Mexican Studies program has been doing very well. I cannot claim credit for it. All I can say, the way I can say about folklore, was that I planted the seeds, I saw the seedlings grow about this tall, but then others really saw them become a forest.
For Americo Paredes, the decade of the 1970s ended with local, national, and international recognition for 10 years of scholarship and teaching. On September 26, 1984, Paredes had surgery to remove a cancerous mass. Although Paredes retired from full-time teaching in 1984, he continued to teach part-time for the next few years. Paredes now turned much of his attention to writing. The result was the publication of 5 books. In November 24, 1998, Paredes was again honored by his hometown and his Brownsville alma mater, the University of Texas at Brownsville, Texas Southmost College.
I am extremely honored, not only because of all that you have done for me, but including how much you who are here represent. Our story has been one that has taken some time. I fit in a kind of I think of it more as a slope. We're moving up. Now the thing is for you young ones to keep pushing up. If you stop, you'll roll to the bottom again. So I think, at least I come at the tail end right now of a proud tradition. And I know, I hope, and I know that you will continue with that tradition.
On May 5, 1999, Americo Paredes died of pneumonia with his family and friends by his side. On June 2nd, a memorial was held at the University of Texas at Austin. Those in attendance reminisced and remembered the man who for much of his life had raised, carried, and defended their cultural flag with a dignity that both friends and foes could not help but respect.
For my part, I want to speak very briefly of 2 things. As a folklorist working outside of a university environment, Dr. Paredes' example as a citizen and a scholar is one that I've always cherished. Sometimes I'm called a public folklorist. I'm not particularly fond of that designation, except as I perceive someone like Dr. Paredes to have been the most public of folklorists. Highly accessible, highly accountable, highly affirmative, and highly subversive. He validated a community's understanding of itself, and he turned mainstream interpretations on their head.
I will remember Don Americo for many things: the generosity of his spirit, the integrity of his character, the brilliance of his mind. But I want to celebrate him today for 2 things that have stood out for me as I have thought of him this past couple of weeks: his humor and his voice. In the deep sorrow that I, like all of you, have felt since learning of Don Americo's passing, I find myself at the same time recalling again and again the irrepressible humor of this most dignified of men. I think he was as devoted to jokes as he was to corridos. Some of you will remember how forgetful he was with names. On one occasion, he forgot the name of one of our more prominent and self-anointed colleagues in another department. I said, "Americo, you've known this guy for years. How could you have forgotten his name?" "I'll tell you," he said. "Every time I remember the name of some pendejo, I forget the words to a corrido, and it's not worth it." Humor was a quality, I must say, that Don Americo shared with his wife, Amelia, as well, and hospitality and generosity and that remarkable strength of character that we have loved in both of them.
Americo's beloved wife, Nena, died a few months later. Both were cremated in Austin. On November 26 at high noon, some of their family and friends drove to Boca Chica Beach to the mouth of the Rio Grande near Brownsville, Texas. There, at a junction where the blue-green Gulf waters met the rushing brown waters of the river, Vincent released some of the ashes of his father and mother. As the ashes disappeared into the river, we realized that Americo's life had gone full circle. He had left a legacy of scholarship and teaching that led the way to serious research in an area that had long been overlooked. And although he lived in the Valley 1/3 of his life, the border community was important to him all of his life. And for that, the academic community is a better place.